Hello. Coming to you again here for another podcast at Care at Scale. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Gary Schindel
Good morning.
he is the president of Paladin Healthcare, and it will be a pleasure to work through a conversation that, as I've spent some time with him, it is pretty unbelievable to hear his story, which is what we're going to get into as the foundational building blocks of where he has been through many years of not only his personal life, but his professional life, as we talk about how carrying at scale, as I have done some of these other podcasts, the face of where care is these days and how it impacts people, and not only both in their personal life but in their professional life. And Gary has a story about how his personal life turned into his professional life and then rolled back into his personal life and then back into his professional life. So
Something
I,
like that. Yep.
I think we'll kind of certainly talk a lot about that today. Without much more to do, Gary, I'd like you to start kind of talking about where you started off with your family business, which your mom and dad, but specifically your dad, invented what became a product that has changed in, I would say, what every person would know if they walked into any medical office a space, let alone a medical office in a practice or in a hospital, and they see this thing, which they don't really know what that thing is until they might get their blood pressure drawn, or if they look on the wall. You've impacted that, and certainly your father was the beating part of that. If you wouldn't mind starting with that story and talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And again, thank you for the opportunity today to share this. So in the late 1960s, my dad, Ernst Schindel, was one of three partners, started a company called Fairfield Surgical and Medical Electronics. And there were three different divisions. And he had a division which was based on providing support for the up and coming pre-hospital ambulance, so to speak, technology. This included some basic monitoring equipment, but more importantly, equipment management tools to manage this new technology that was now being used in a mobile environment. With that came the advent of an equipment rail system, basically a garage organizer, if you will, at that time for ambulances. The other two divisions were not financially sustainable over time. He bought out the other two partners, dumped the other stuff, sold it off, and started basically Fairfield Medical Products in Fairfield, Connecticut, focusing primarily on what is still to this day the lowest technology device in healthcare. It's a rail with an adapter, and then it mounts all of this stuff onto the rail. With that, he built a business. I was child labor in the machine shop growing up. There's very few things that he was making that I didn't have some hand in at some point in the machine shop, summer jobs, weekends, nights, whatever it took as a family business to build it. It gave me a good foundation from a manufacturing standpoint. My dad is a manufacturing engineer by trade. I got a lot of the practical stuff from him and again, just working in the machine shop. I went off to school. I was a pre-med zoology major. I wanted to be a doctor. I was an EMT. At the time I was 16 years old, I was also, and I had gotten my love for ambulances because I grew up going to ambulance trade shows. When I was 16, I joined the Volunteer Ambulance Corps and became a clinician myself in practice with those actual tools, which we used in our ambulances. It was kind of cool that I was actually using the things that he was making in clinical practice. Then at some point, I switched over to marketing. At some point, grade point average really counts when you go to medical school. It really wasn't my bag. And then I took a job as a product manager for medical electronics. I did not go to work for him per se, being the immigrant German, typical German there was always a running joke. There was a right way, the wrong way, and Ernst's way. And I say that out of pure love and respect, but that's kind of where we moved forward. And then I went to work for, like I said, a patient monitoring company. I to become North American business manager for a company out of Finland in monitoring that was bringing products in here. So, I mean, that was my path. And then he sold a company in 1986 to Herman Miller. And at that time, Milcare was the healthcare division of Herman Miller. Milcare technically bought Fairfield. They then approached me because they were looking for someone who had product knowledge and some clinical background to take over a sales region. And I said, sure, why not? I know the business. I know the product. For Milcare, I actually became the Southeast sales manager for Milcare for Fairfield products at the time. And that's how I got into this business. Long story short, Herman Miller or Milcare morphed into Herman Miller for healthcare. Or even before that, just on Herman Miller, and bounced back a couple times within Herman Miller. 12 years later, Herman Miller sold the company, sold Fairfield to an independent owner who then sold it to Medeas, who Medeas sold it to Hillrom, and Hillrom took us out of the business. It was a long story and a pathway to get there, but and at some point with Hillrom, I left and I went to work for a company called Draeger in Germany. I was the business developer here in the US, and then moved over to Germany as the international marketing manager for architectural systems. But all along, even when I went to Draeger, I needed a rail system because we needed to have a means of managing technology and equipment, even in the ceiling booms and in the head walls that Draeger was manufacturing. I got in contact with some of the old Fairfield folks, and they started up a manufacturing opportunity for me to buy rails for Draeger. And that kind of went into another direction. And at some point, I realized that, this rail was never broken, and a lot of people have tried to fix it, and people just didn't understand it. 13 years ago, 13 and a half years ago, I started Paladin Healthcare, and just to go back to the basics and really take it to its roots and say, look, this is the lowest technology device in healthcare. Stop making it so complicated. And we went back to what it was in 1968. And we took it to the market, and 13 years later, we are still here.
Well, let's kind of dig into that little piece because I understand small business a little bit, and my father and I were in business at one point together, and sometimes the basics are what you need to go back to. And when you were in the back of the ambulance or going to the trade shows with your dad, there was obviously something there that you learned that years later you went back to the core base of the business. We were talking about how vertical and horizontal were the rails, and there was just basic parts where you knew what the industry needed. And when you started the business yourself, you came to market, and I'm assuming that the market received it well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the foundation had been laid. When we migrated, well, my dad, Fairfield, migrated from the EMS pre-hospital into the hospital. The means of managing things horizontally was new. Up until that point, they had vertical power columns, and basically everything was done vertically, but there was never any means of managing stuff horizontally, ironically, right? So something as simple you'd think would be, self-evident. But so the incorporation of the Fairfield rail was the first time healthcare environments had the means of managing things left and right? Moving things from one side of the bed to the other side of the bed, and giving the control of that bedside back to the people who actually work there, not to the architects, not to the designers, not to the contractors. Right? The control was now based on the clinicians and where they needed stuff. So that was the early message. And, and we know it worked. And I mean, I worked in the environment. I still work with the product we manufacture clinically. I'm still a clinician. I still work with those products in the field. The message was clearly it worked. Why break something or fix something that works when it doesn't need fixing? And that's kind of where we went back to.
As you were taking that feedback from the market, were they asking for new ways to hang additional product onto it? I mean, from the time you think about tube televisions to the monitors we have today, obviously you couldn't put a tube TV, and now we have monitors that you can just hang on the walls and those
Yeah.
type of things. That
Yeah.
progression is obviously significant to the need that's
No doubt. I mean, back in the day, in the 80s, Hewlett Packard had a bedside monitor that weighed about 75 pounds, right? And it was like a boat anchor that you had to mount on the rail, and took two people to mount, and it was that, right? And then the advancement of technology in healthcare, they say every 18 months, there's a new generation of stuff coming out. And that's what makes us kind of unique in what we do, is that we adapt to that very clearly and very quickly, because we are the basis. The mechanism of our attaching something to something is the key to what we do. And it doesn't really matter what that something is. No is never the answer. We just find a way to do it. We 3D print models. We do proof of concept. We are absolutely proactive in managing the emerging technologies that are coming out so fast. And there's probably not 2 weeks that go by where we're not introduced to something new that somebody wants to mount on a rail. That's what separates us out from a lot of other people, is that we understand that and we do that and we react very quickly. And that's the nice part about being a small business. I mean, I've worked in the Fortune 25 environment, and never again. I don't need 25 signatures to approve a change order on a transducer, which I had in one of my companies. I just make a phone call to my production guy and say, hey, I need this. 24 hours later, I have it. And it's that simple.
and You just glossed over one other thing. The product's been in the market for tens and tens and tens of years, and it's withstand a significant tough environment because it is not an easy environment in the medical field. And we had talked about how you're still standing behind product that's been in the market for a long time. Why don't you just describe some of what you've seen?
Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff out there from the 70s that's still in use. We have one client who actually the rail in that facility I helped my dad install when I was in high school. Right? I mean, on the weekend. So they bailed out of that old hospital into a new building, but 2 years ago they had to go back to that because they were their census was so high. They had to go and refresh those old rooms. And the rail that was back there 50 years ago is still hanging on the wall. And they approached us and said, "Hey, can you provide accessories for this?" I said, "Absolutely." Our accessories today are backwards compatible to rail that was installed over 50 years ago. And by that same token, there's still accessories, believe it or not, out there in some of these older facilities that are used on our rail that we deliver today. And they were forwards compatible to what today's rail is. One of the important things is not to forget the legacy of where you came from, right? The rail, again, was never broken. We use the same rail profile that was used 50, 60 years ago, and it still works. And from a support standpoint, we have a lifetime warranty on the things that we manufacture, and we honor that warranty even on the legacy stuff that goes back to Fairfield. If you tell me something's broken, I'm just going to replace it. I'm not going to decide what's out of warranty. Right? It costs too much money to process a silly PO or try to figure out whose fault it is. It's like, look, you're going to replacement piece and be done with it.
Well, you and I were talking before this how we've come to be a society of basically we just throw it away. Or a disposable society. And you just mentioned the 70s for a product that's 50 years old that someone can still call up and somehow you're going to manufacture and or support. That in itself is just speaks to it doesn't happen in the industry. It's incredible
Probably not. Yeah.
that there's even product line available, let alone that there's a company still there that can withstand and or provide support along the lines of what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, we had one hospital up in Massachusetts. We renovated their ER and they had rail going back that far. In fact, the respiratory therapist remembered my dad's sales rep from like late 70s, early 80s. That rail was still in use, and they actually thought it was kind of cool that a second generation, a new iteration of that company was now servicing that same hospital. And they actually wrote a very nice letter in their foundation newsletter and highlighting as cool it is. They had a staff member there going back to the old days and still there for the new stuff, and then how it's all fits and the old stuff fits in the new and vice versa. So it was kind of a cool recognition that we do things uniquely, and it's not something you hear every day.
No, and healthcare is unique in that sense, right? It's a platform that everyone needs where the human body is the human body. If you're still going to go to a physician for care, it's not every industry, right? The fact that you can walk into a hospital that's old, in essence, doesn't mean that the technology in it's is old. It just means that the physical structure is old because it's
Correct.
downtown city or it's in a space that's been there for a long time, and they're just have that same physical need that's associated with it. I would be remiss without saying that along the lines of the fact that you still can maintain the structure that you has been around for 50 years, you also have a catalog that has 100 pages in it. When I went on your webpage and went to the flip book that just kept flipping and flipping and flipping, that speaks to the variety of the need that's associated with what the rail can support, which also just speaks to the need for the product lines that are out there to service. It's wonderful that you can service so many opportunities that are in the marketplace, but I also think that you also have, when you walk into a scenario where someone's going to be building out or they have a request, you open it up and say, well, my team's here, what is the need? How do you walk through that request when it's an open slate for the need from the
Yeah,
opportunity?
I mean, the catalog is a culmination of now 13 years of doing this with new accessories, new technology coming out, and we just add that to it. The old stuff hasn't necessarily gone away. There's a lot of that, as you mentioned, out there. So we just keep that in there in the
Mhm.
book. But we get a request from a hospital, St. Mary's on the Hill, and said, "Hey, I need to mount this. Have you done it before?" I said, "No. Can you send us a sample or a tech sheet?" Actually, it's interesting right now when we're heading over to Germany to work with the Army hospital over there. They use, for example, an entirely different brand of paper towels and soap dispensers and things that we mount. We've had to make literally a whole new family of products just for the European style stuff that they're using over there. And we 3D print it and we do a proof of concept, and then we attach it to the device and make sure it works. And then when it comes down to that, then we make a metal version in the machine shop. And if the volume's high enough, we go to a plastic molding that we have in-house and we make a plastic piece of it. So, and the plastic piece has a zinc compound antimicrobial inherited in it. The aluminum pieces have a powder coated DuPont silver ion antimicrobial element in it. That's how we address new things to the market. We look at it, come up with a design solution, 3D print it, proof of concept, make sure it works, and then go to production.
Technology, I mean, to keep mentioning 3D printing, I'm assuming 3D printing has been a tremendous change in idea to proof of concept to bring to market.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, that
Yeah.
as
It
opposed,
used to take us, if we needed to do something on a CNC machine to make a model, right? Number one, you had to stop whatever the CNC machine was doing in terms of a production cycle, right? Let's say we're doing 1,000 plates of some type, right? We'd have to stop that and reconfigure it to make one prototype of whatever this new device was, right? And then that took time and a lot of effort, and it disrupted the flow of production. What 3D printing has allowed us to do, it goes from idea to sample within a couple hours, literally. I mean, we get something new, we can print it, and the next day it goes out the door and we haven't interrupted production. It's made us overall more efficient as a manufacturer in terms of our able to throughput and minimize our disruptions. But it's from a customer response. We can send something out within days of their request. It tells them that we're listening, right? And we're capable of reacting.
it's pretty neat. Just how technology continues not only to provide opportunities for you, but also provide the need to the customer, who is obviously the thing you're trying to service. And then as more and more products come onto market, and they do, that you're constantly
Yep.
able to service that over and over
Yeah.
again. So no, it's quite a story. And the one other thing we didn't upplay enough was that you shifted pretty drastically from your professional career into what is now your second generation family business. What was that transition like? And you made the comment that you kind of took every penny that you had and came over into starting and changing what was before into what is now
Yeah.
what you're doing today.
Well, I mean, in the patient monitoring realm, it was interesting because I was working in the environments that the rail also served. And it was in several instances where, as a product manager for patient monitors, we were actually mounting our monitors onto the rail that my dad made. I mean, it's just, there was always this constant cross pollination. So I never really lost contact with what Fairfield was doing and what he was doing. I was always in the healthcare realm. And even as a clinician in the emergency department and pre-hospital world, I was constantly in that space where that stuff was being used or not. I mean, I've worked in those environments where, we had rail and we were efficient, in places where we didn't have the rail and we were highly inefficient. That comes from personal clinical experience as well. When we decided this, I mean, I was working for a group that had committed to sell their shares of the company I was with at the time to me, and that fell through at the end. So I really had kind of everything that I had hoped for just kind of went away and on literally overnight. And then my wife was the one that actually said, you have the relationships in this industry. Why don't you just do it yourself? I thought, well, it's not going to be easy. We'll start and we'll go for it. But she's the one that actually gave me the if you will, the final say and go and push to actually do this. So I dumped my 401k that I'd, saved all my life to do. And I figure, all right, this is either going to sink or swim. We're either going to do this and my company will at some point be my new 401k in retirement, or we lose it. But, she was my sugar mama for 2 years, not taking a paycheck, and everything went back in the company. And 13 years later, here we are.
That part of the risk reward is
It was a big risk.
I'd
And
say
we had our son was he's 23, 10, so he was 10 years old at the time, right? I mean, so we had it was a big risk. So
happy to be part of the story, to listen about how it all played out in the right direction. And many years later,
I
the story that came out.
appreciate the opportunity to share that.
And one other piece of it that's personal to why we're even having this conversation is that you were telling me the story about how hospice did come into play for both your parents towards the tail end, but more importantly, that both your parents were part of the transition. And if you go on the website, you can actually see where the handing of the rail, or otherwise known as the handing off of of the business to you. They were both there to see and witness that. But after that, they both did participate in palliative care and then into hospice. And you kind of had your own feelings about both how it impacted both your mom and your dad in different ways as they had to deal at their end of life.
Yeah, I mean, luckily they were both still with us when I started the company, and they were able to see that, his legacy was able to be carried on. And so my mom passed about 6 months after started the company and in hospice care at home. And my dad passed about 3 years after that. So he saw that we were moving well and we were doing well. And, he saw the company grow and move forward. So I don't want to delve into too much of a philosophical discussion, but realistically, hospice is a beautiful thing for families, and thank God there are people like that who are able to care under those circumstances. It's very difficult to do that, and again, thank God there are nurses and caregivers that are able to do that. As a paramedic, I see somebody for 45 minutes, give a report, and leave. But to attach the bond that you get attached to when you're working in a cancer center or hospice at home or something like that. It's just, again, thank God there are people who are able to do that, because I'm not one of them. It's just, again, I don't want to get too philosophical here. It's just unfortunate that we always have a celebration of life after they're dead rather than before they die. My parents would have both loved a party on Saturday and funeral on Sunday if that was possible, but that's a whole different subject.
Yeah, it is. Well, as I interview and talk to people who are in the midst, like they run have had hospice and palliative care centers and businesses for 20 years or extended time frames. They tell the stories of just about just what you're referring to, not only as the ownership, but taking care of the patients and the families and everything that's associated with it, and just the challenges that are on both sides of it. And you're absolutely right. There's ways that it happens very well, and then there's other ways that it certainly could be done better. But
It's frustrating.
it is. It is, but, I'm more to the point, I'm glad that both your parents were able to witness what happened with you and the transition for the business, and, certainly to witness how the business has hit the second generation, and, how it is wonderful to see 50 years of something that has transitioned in an industry that has not much of it. It seems to change by the moment for everyone in that sense.
It keeps it interesting, right? There's never a dull moment. I love what I do. I love the people that I've worked with me. I've got an amazing team, internal and external, and it's fun. I'm having fun, and I really don't have a job. I just I go
Well,
have fun every
and to the
day.
point where
So,
the team is not only here in the United States, but across Europe and the Middle East. You said this year you're trying to grow that part of your international, correct?
yeah, the company goal for 2026 is to lay a strong foundation for international growth next year. So we're in the active process of doing that right now with a number of different avenues that we're pursuing, and we're building our distribution in the Middle East back up. We had a fairly good kind of relationship going over there before COVID. COVID kind of threw everything to the wind. We're picking that back up. Are working right now. It's a little unsettled over there, so I'm not going there next week, but we have plans on attending what used to be Arab Health next year, the World Health Expo in Dubai, and we're working with the DoD and a lot of global healthcare facilities around the world. We've got some chosen target markets that we'll get into next year, and again, we're just working at establishing those foundations right now.
I think that would be a good stopping point for where we can talk about in our hopefully next podcast of the global market or wherever our conversation might go. But there is plenty more to discuss as we just, I'm sure, scratch the surface of many, many more conversations. But Gary,
I look forward to it, Greg. Thank you.
it has really been a pleasure to learn more about where the foundation all began, how it's amazing that such a simple rail can impact so many lives in so many ways, and how your family and your business and so many other people that work with you and around you have changed healthcare on a daily basis.
And it is. It's the lowest technology device in healthcare, but if it's on a wall, it should be on a rail. I mean, that's what we haven't even gotten into the life cycle cost benefit of this and what the impact is financially to a healthcare environment. And that may be a whole different subject too. But I mean, we have impacted significant cost reductions of day-to-day operations in healthcare facilities from the smallest St. Mary's on the Hill to the largest university medical centers in the United States. I mean, there's so much evidence based out there for the application of a rail into healthcare. It's undeniable anymore. So we have some headwinds that we still have to get through, but that's probably a subject for a different day.
I bet we could have a full just that topic. We probably could do the ROI of. I will do that. That will do
Yeah.
that as a subject.
Yeah.
Well, Gary,
So,
thank you very much, and we will see you again on a screen
all right,
near you.
Craig, thanks again.
Thanks, Gary. Bye bye.